three RP, but the three Ps. Firstly, prioritisation. Secondly, paradigm shift in terms of the nature of our response. And third, the underpinning theme that has been always with us, and that is, if you like, the fundament of what we're doing, partnership. We're all in this together from our different perspectives, and what we need to produce at the end of it is the most effective response together. We'll come back, we'll hold those themes in our head, if I may, from your presentation, and come back to them once the Minister has spoken to us. Your Excellency, thank you.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to be with you in this very important roundtable meeting that we keep holding, and I agree with His Excellency the Ambassador, Mr. Ogden. I think it's important that we might have to maybe increase the frequency of the meeting and maybe try to do a quarterly meeting at least, or once every 4 months at the worst. As I've always mentioned to several of our partners here, and you are all important partners to us in Jordan, to the government of Jordan, to the people of Jordan. I always look forward to these meetings because we do have frank and constructive discussions, and we try to identify any challenges that we collectively face, because we're all in this together. And we understand that the challenges are great because of the protracted nature of this crisis. I think what's very interesting, and I want to maybe give you a quick update based on all the meetings that were held at the UN. I wanted to give you a quick summary maybe of where things are, at least what I felt the consensus is on the Syria issue, based on arriving last night close to midnight and having spent the past 4 or 5 days in meetings both with His Majesty and within the UNGA and within the Jordan EU event that we hosted in the United Nations yesterday or Tuesday, and many of the side events that we attended. I think it's incredible to note that in prior years the Syria crisis was present. What was different this time was the Syria refugee crisis was very present as a difference. And clearly what's happening in Europe has brought it back to the front burner. And that's obvious because as many politicians in New York said, the crisis now is knocking down the doors of Europe, and so it has come to the forefront of global attention and so on. There is relative consensus, notwithstanding the recent political developments, the Russian airstrikes, and what exactly did they strike or not, and all the political complexity that comes with that. Everybody is almost using, and this is my summary I'll give you based on what I've managed to. There is a political track. Everybody feels that everyone needs to work to bring the crisis to an end, and very strong language to support the efforts of the Mistura under the UN umbrella to see where that could lead in terms of a political transition and so on. Now, no one was naive to understand that this could end up producing nothing, but there was talk on the first track, which is the political track. The second track is the security, fighting Daesh, the terrorists, and all of that, and the summit that the esteemed President Obama held against countering violent extremism and so on. So that track is also proceeding. It's considered as the #1 priority by everyone, including by Russia now, and that's also proceeding in parallel. And these are the two tracks I don't want to get into because our focus here is the third track, which is the humanitarian development resilience aspect of dealing with the crisis. There is now much better understanding about the sense of urgency, and maybe it's the famous child's body which washed up on the shore. It's the waves of refugees crossing into Europe. But clearly the sense of urgency is back. I think that's important for all of us because we are at a point where there were worries vis-a-vis donor fatigue, vis-a-vis providing adequate support and so on. Everybody recognizes now that we need to do more, but we need to do things also in a smarter and cost-effective way. So that's well recognized. The second point, the scale. I think people started to understand more what we in Jordan, possibly Lebanon and others have been shouting and saying. The scale is enormous. So when we say, so many Syrians are in Jordan, whether you want to just look at the refugees that are registered, half the number of the 1.4 million, or you want to take the entire Syrian population. So if you just take the registered refugees, that's like the EU receiving 50 million people. If you want to take, the 1.4 million, the 20% of our population, that's like the EU receiving 100 million. So I think people started to understand as people are moving across the borders what the scale for Jordan, for Lebanon specifically, not belittling what Turkey is dealing with, but Turkey is an 80 million plus country, the 17th largest economy. They still have a lot of pressures, but there is also recognition that the pressures have to be taken as proportion to your population, your per capita income, and your total burden that you're carrying as a country and what your resources that you have. And with that, I think there has been a signaling that Jordan and Lebanon specifically are carrying a massive amount of burden relative to anyone else. Funny enough, Iraq was absent in the discussions. So the burden of Iraq, the Kurds, and what they're doing, amazing. They even didn't sit in their own Iraq seats in the different sessions, which was, to me, very surprising. So Jordan and Lebanon were very active. I think Jordan was the most active in working the corridor diplomacy, the UNGA diplomacy, and everything related to it. But it was an interesting just side remark to note on that regard. Everybody was talking about the holistic approach, and funny enough, it was wonderful that it took the UNDP administrator, myself, Commissioner Guterres, to remind everyone that there is a holistic approach. There is no need to do a rethinking. The 3 RPs and the JRPs and the Lebanon RP are meant to be the new ways of dealing with this crisis. That there's a protracted crisis. You combine humanitarian resilience and development put together. So there was a sudden kind of wake up. Everybody was trying to remind everyone that we figured this out. It is the Jordan response plan and the 3 RPs that are the new way of dealing with this. And for some reason, there is no need to start reinventing the wheel again, because actually the countries of the region, namely Jordan and Lebanon, with the help of you, the donors and the UN, we came up with the new approach. We have the plans ready. The question is there adequate funding to support these plans? And that became very clear to everyone. Because the discussions initially in the week went through what is the new model? And then everybody converged at the end, well, there is no need for a new model. What we're doing is the right model. It is different than in prior humanitarian crises. The response plans are the new model that we need to be using, are the holistic approach, coupled with the security and political tracks, obviously. And the challenge is, are they receiving the adequate support that they need? And that became very clear, especially at the Jordan EU event that was sponsored by 2 commissioners in the European Union, as well as the EU foreign minister who came at the closing session and had a joint press conference with me at the UN on the event. So this was, I mentioned this because I think it's very interesting. It's as if, there was a rude awakening throughout the past few days of, going around trying to think what's the new approach, and then everybody coming back to the conclusion, we have the new approach. It is the JRPs, it is the Lebanon response plan and so on that's been prepared. And where the challenge is, are we sufficiently funding it to create enough of an environment for the host communities, host countries, as well as the refugees to stay there rather than take a death journey all the way to Europe? And that was really the conclusion, the key conclusion in my book in all of that. Everybody recognized there was the idea of proportional and disproportional burden sharing and who's doing what. So everybody converged on the need for everyone to contribute to this proportionally and resources to go to those who need it the most in that sense, with a lot of discussion, by the way, on the importance of humanitarian aid going also inside Syria, meaning that the Syria-related UN Security Council resolutions to be fully implemented. So there was a lot of discussion on this issue, because at the end of the day, that's also a very critical part. It's not what's happening just in Jordan and in Lebanon, but it's also what happens inside Syria and of course on Turkey and Iraq. So that took also a lot. A key aspect in all of this, everybody converged on the importance of focusing on education. That the worst thing we could do, on top of meeting the humanitarian livelihood needs, is to make sure we don't lose, the Syrians, because we're losing generations. So on the Jordan side, we're reaching close to, I think, 150,000 in public schools, but there's still 97,000 we haven't absorbed. We're the highest, actually, in neighboring countries in terms of how many Syrians we managed to integrate into our schooling system. So Lebanon, I think, has 500,000. They only took in 180,000, but 300,000 plus has